Kano Emirate troubles fester as ROI youths wade in, calling Ganduje power drunk. Central Bank blocks bank accounts of textile, rice and palm oil industry smugglers. In international news, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates make UN list of shame. And in sport, Nigeria's Super Falcons not super in France over the weekend as they gifted Norway 2 own goals of 3 with which they were defeated.
This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatunji. The Kano Emirates troubles appear to be festering now the ROI Youth Consultative Forum has waded in by accusing Kano State Governor Abdullahi Ganduje of being power drunk. The forum's president, Yerima Shatima, made the charge as he was reacting to the feud between the Ganduje government and Emir of Kano, Muhammad Sanusi II. He described the face-off as unnecessary. The Ganduje administration has accused Sanusi of misappropriating 3.5 billion naira of the Emirates Council's fund. The governor intensified his actions against the emir after the release of a report by the State Anti-Corruption Office and Public Complaints Commission, who had investigated allegations that the emir had squandered the council's funds. The report recommended suspension of the emir, and the state government has handed the emir a query. It was reported that the government was planning to completely depose the emir upon the submission of the forthcoming report of the panel of inquiry, which is expected to indict the emir. Shatima of the ROI Youth Consultative Forum has warned that a deposition of the emir would lead to crisis in the state. Central Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele has said smuggling and dumping pose challenges to the country's economic policy. To combat the challenges, Emefiele says the government will identify and block bank accounts of companies who illegally import textile, rice and palm oil. The central bank governor said this at a consultative roundtable with some economists in Lagos over the weekend. He said the central bank will collaborate with the border control agencies to use the banking system to stop them from smuggling and dumping goods in Nigeria. He said their accounts will be blocked and closed nationwide. Emefiele says names of the smuggling and dumping companies so far identified, along with their leaders, would be released soon. The central bank boss says some accounts of some in the textile, rice and palm oil companies have already been blocked. The retired Chief Justice of Nigeria, Walter Nahe, whose voluntary retirement letter has been accepted by President Muhammadu Buhari, may actually fare better in retirement. He has billed to receive at least 2.5 billion naira in cash and kind benefits as he retires. Onoye has been caught up in a scandal since January when he was accused of filing a false assets declaration and failing to declare domiciliary US dollar, euro and pound sterling accounts and some domestic naira accounts. Onoye did not wait for his retirement due date next year. He has decided to leave now, actually back at the end of May, to avoid prosecution. President Buhari says he accepts Onoye's voluntary retirement and thanked him for his service to the country. As Onoye retires, the president has instructed Acting Chief Justice Tanko Muhammad to appoint 5 new justices for the Supreme Court to complete the number of justices prescribed for the bench by the Constitution. The African Free Trade Agreement has just kicked into high gear on the continent, even though 3 countries are still holding out and ratifying the agreement. But that notwithstanding, a local Nigerian technology startup seems to have been impacting the continent by harnessing the power of its engineering talents. The company trains, grooms and develops technology talents and sends them all over the continent to impact technological development across the country, Deji Badmus reports.
Arguably one of Africa's biggest technology startups, Andela connects global companies with the best talents in software engineering right here in Africa. It basically trains people with almost no knowledge of coding and grooms them into top-rated global tech engineers. With its Software Engineers to the Power of X initiative, it is opening its doors to more experienced tech developers.
Now, the Software Engineer to the Power of X campaign is really geared towards attracting mid-level and senior software engineers. And is attracting hundreds and hundreds of them, right? And this is basically a call for application to say that if you're a software engineer in Africa and you're interested in actually changing or solving some of Africa's challenges with technology, if you're also very interested in becoming a world-class engineer, Andela is really the place for you.
In an ecosystem with a global technical talent shortage problem, Andela is helping to fill the gap. At the moment, it works with over 170 partners across the world.
Andela is currently looking to recruit over 500 mid-level and senior software engineers in Africa just this year, right? But then I envisage that next year we might actually be looking to attract 2,000. And I'm guessing that the only reason why we're not even trying to attract over 10,000 is because we do not have the infrastructure yet to manage those people.
In the last 4 years, Andela has invested in over 1,300 African tech engineers, paired them with over 150 engineering firms around the world, and expanded to 6 countries on the continent. It's just raised a $100 million Series D funding to build infrastructure, train and employ talents. The African startup is fast going global and helping to find solutions to the world's everyday problems.
Former member of the House of Representatives, Ned Nwoko, who was thought to have been returned as senator-elect for Delta North Senatorial District, was denied accreditation by the management of the National Assembly on Sunday. He was at the National Assembly complex on Sunday to be accredited for Tuesday's inauguration ceremony. National Assembly Clerk Chief Mohammed Sani Omolori informed Nwoko that he will not be accredited because of unsettled electoral disputes in his senatorial district. Another member of the People's Democratic Party, Senator Peter Nwoboshe, had challenged Nwoko's victory in the last National Assembly election. Nwoboshe had succeeded at the Federal High Court, where Nwoko's victory had been nullified last month. The court has asked the Independent National Electoral Commission to issue a certificate of return to Nwoboshe. Coming up, African stories. Sudanese militiamen accused of raping men and women during crackdown on certain protesters. And later, international news. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates on UN list of shame.
You are watching ANN.
This used to be me. But that was before I got the perfect bag. It's handy and easy to use. All I need in one compact space, just like my MTN Extra Value plan. I used to get one plan for my calls and then try to remember which data plan worked for me. Roaming was a totally different ballgame. Not anymore. I've got the MTN Extra Value all-in-one plan. If you're a data buff like me, you get extra data with some talk time. And if you like to make calls, you get extra talk time with some data. And when I'm abroad, I automatically browse, chat, and call right on the same plan. MTN Extra Value was made just for me.
More of data or calls, whichever one you prefer. MTN Extra Value is made just for you.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. In African stories, An eyewitness to the military crackdown against protesters in the Sudan is alleging sexual atrocities against militiamen during the sit-in protest. A women's rights campaigner, Nahid Jabrala, a women's rights activist, has told the German broadcaster that numerous rapes of young Sudanese women had been recorded when security forces moved in to clear the sit-in protest near the military headquarters in the capital, Khartoum. She said the alleged perpetrators were members of a paramilitary unit, the Raid Support Forces, a part of the Sudanese Security Service. Jabrala told DW that both women and men had been raped. She said that some of the bodies recovered from the Nile were of women who had been sexually abused. She said cases of rape had already been documented in the hospitals as well. Jabrala says those responsible for the brutal dispersal of the sit-in demonstrations were not members of the Sudanese army. She claims they belong to the Rapid Support Forces. Weeks of torrential rain and subsequent flooding in the Uganda capital, Kampala, have caused havoc and caused more grief to locals and business owners over the weekend. Severe weather in recent weeks has seen at least 8 persons dead in flash flooding. Several roads are cut off and there is widespread damage resulting from heavy rains. Kami Valley, 25 kilometers from Kampala, incurred significant damage after heavy downpour over the weekend. Crops were swept away by intense flood water rushing down from the hills. Many households in the valley were also invaded.
We have had issues of flooding here, but actually there have been no any solution here. There has been actually nothing. There has been nothing to assist us.
The devastating rains over the past few weeks has left some 500 persons displaced in suburban and rural areas on the outskirts of Kampala. Businesses have been lost and small farms have also been destroyed. Ugandan Red Cross Society has launched sensitization campaigns to ensure that more people become knowledgeable about the effect of those kinds of floods, as well as any diseases that may come as a result of stagnated water. Meanwhile, Rwandan authorities have temporarily reopened the country's busiest border crossing with Uganda to allow heavy goods vehicles to cross. The border crossing had been closed for more than 3 months. Most cross-border movements were stopped because of a diplomatic feud between the two countries. The Ugandan authorities estimated 70% of border trade was stopped, a situation that has had a huge effect on business and daily life for families in both countries. Rwanda's Revenue Authority now says the border has been reopened to assess whether the renovated border crossing works. Rwanda has accused Uganda of illegal arrest and the torture of its citizens. In February, Rwanda promptly closed the main crossing at Gatuna, citing quick renovation works and denied that there was a political motive. It also advised its citizens not to cross over to Uganda. Internet use in Africa has been growing in the last few years, and every part of the continent is recording positive numbers in that regard. Ethiopia has just reported a 61% jump in the number of social media users in the country and a bright expectation for the future. Gurum Chale reports.
At the end of March 2019, the number of social media users has seen a remarkable 61% increase. And according to the report, Ethiopia stood second only next to Western Sahara. And now almost half of the internet users in the Eastern Africa country have social media accounts.
The 61% is that currently it becoming 10.6 million social media users. So this is also a big one. By the way, we have currently 21.6 million customers on internet users, so that you can see that 50% of them they are using social media.
The report, Digital 2019, and the almost 11 million additional social media users attribute the major increment to the reforms of the government and the major telecom services provider in the country, Ethio Telecom.
This country also changed its perspective towards social media. So you see government officials, being big out there in social media and, basically telling the people what they are doing and even all the daily activities. So that actually, in my point of view, attracted people to follow and to be part of the social media engagement. But in our perspective, so we believe the tariff reduction, 40 to 50% average tariff reduction, have contributed a lot in bringing more people to be able to use internet, mobile, especially mobile internet services.
But as the climb in social media users in Ethiopia is held, some still are worried about the negative and violence triggering posts being seen across the main platforms such as Facebook and Twitter. Ethiopia's telecom officials understand the concerns.
I think the expansion is very encouraging, but in the meantime we have seen so many distractions, and we keep on asking ourselves what can we do about this. But it's very challenging for us as an operator to regulate this kind of environment. So, basically there are other, of course, pertinent, government institutions who should be really working on regulating social media use, and there are attempts.
Obviously, Ethiopia's telecom revenue is mounting due to the ever-growing social media user numbers in the country. And similarly, the country's Attorney General Office is in the process of presenting a legal framework for the parliament to endorse in order to regulate social media usage here in Ethiopia. Under that draft law, fake and fatal news distributors on social media platforms, for instance, could face terms in jail.
When we return, international news. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates make UN list of shame. And later, sport. Super Falcons not super at Women's World Cup.
You are watching ANN.
Shining our eyes on breaking news, whether in the east or in the west, with Al-Shabaab in Somalia and Boko Haram in Nigeria, with turbulence in the north and agitation in the south. Wherever you live in Nigeria, wherever news happens in Africa, we've got it covered. ANN News, connecting Africans in a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. In international news, Indonesian officials are warning against the prospect of further eruptions from an active volcano on the island of Sumatra after it emitted a huge column of ash, causing panic among residents. Mount Sinabung, which has seen a spike in activity since 2010, erupted for around 9 minutes on Sunday. Although no casualties were reported, officials monitoring the volcano warned of possible fresh eruptions. Mount Sinabung is among Indonesia's most active volcanoes but had been inactive for 4 centuries before its 2010 eruption. Indonesia has nearly 130 active volcanoes, more than any country. Finance ministers and central bank governors from the group of 20 economies concluded their meeting in the Japanese city of Fukuoka by issuing a joint communique on the global economy. The communique points out the risks to world economy from trade tensions without directly referring to the trade disputes between the United States and China. The document says global growth is expected to pick up moderately later this year.
The G20 meeting of finance ministers and central bank chiefs wrapped up Sunday in the Japanese city of Fukuoka. They said they hoped global growth would pick up later this year and would continue into 2020.
There was broad agreement that global growth appears to be stabilizing and is generally projected to pick up later this year. We reaffirm that we shall use all policy tools to support strong, sustainable and balanced and inclusive growth.
Finance ministers from across the world expressed worries that an ongoing trade war between the United States and China could harm world economic growth. The official joint communique, however, stopped short of calling for a resolution to the US-China dispute, the finance leaders instead noting the risks from trade and geopolitical tensions are, quote, intensifying.
U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton announced last month a new set of sanctions on Cuba, Venezuela and Nicaragua. Many have said the latest sanctions on the troika of tyranny, as the Trump administration likes to call Cuba, Venezuela and Nicaragua, is part of the sustained campaign led by the U.S. government to destabilize these countries by creating economic crisis with the goal of forcing regime change. Luis Chirino reports.
The new travel restrictions prohibit U.S. cruise ships from calling at Cuban harbors. However, a provision will allow Americans who booked a group tour to Cuba prior to that date to visit. U.S. cruise companies like Carnival Cruise Line promptly announced they were canceling scheduled trips to the Caribbean island. The Cuban government reacted with an official statement published in the Communist Party newspaper Granma, saying that Cuba will not be intimidated by the U.S. blockade, and blasted attempts to force political concessions by hurting the country's economy and living conditions for its people. This cruise ship behind me may be one of the last of its kind to come from Florida to Havana Harbor, following the latest restrictions by the U.S. administration, which directly affect the private sector that offers services to the American passengers on board these vessels.
Nosotros vivimos de ese turismo. We earn our living from this kind of tourism. If they stop coming, how can we make a living? We'll have nothing, so we'll see a strong impact. This U.S. policy will not affect the government. It'll affect us, the people.
Jose Antonio Perez opened his private restaurant in Old Havana some 24 years ago, and he regrets the tightening of restrictions on U.S. travelers to Cuba.
In the short time they are here, these visitors are learning about private businesses, meeting people, tasting Cuban food. Now we will be forced to go back to the times when we had no cruise ships arriving and try to cushion the impact that this will have on us.
Also affected by the new measures, those who offer city tours to visitors in vintage cars or in horse carriages. Fewer tourists means fewer passengers. For Cuban tourist specialist Jose Perello, the cruise ships provide an important source of livelihood to private workers.
All these cruise ship tourists come to see the new Cuba. They are major consumers of private services. They buy crafts, they eat at private restaurants, and interact with the locals. So the U.S. argument about closing the doors to the Cuban government with these sanctions is not as they say, because they are actually affecting a sector that does not have any strong links to the Cuban government.
For many people here, the U.S. travel sanctions are a lose-lose proposition. Not only will more Americans not be able to visit Cuba, those on the island who count on tourists will miss out on the economic benefits.
In the coming days, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres will finalize his annual list of governments and armed groups that have committed grave violations against children in armed conflicts. A party can be listed for one or several violations, including rape, killing and maiming, and recruiting children as soldiers. The list is one of UN's most effective tools for the protection of children in armed conflicts because it involves a consequence that perpetrators dread and seek to avoid. Their public naming and shaming before the whole world. Inside sources say Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are part of the list because of their actions in Yemen over the last 4 years that have resulted in the killing and maiming of large numbers of children and the destruction of hundreds of schools and dozens of hospitals in Yemen. Still ahead, sports. Super Falcons not super at Women's World Cup. Please stay with us.
You are watching ANN.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. In sport, former champions Norway kicked off their Women's World Cup campaign with a routine 3-0 victory over Nigeria. Norway scored 3 goals in the first half to make an easy work out of Nigeria in their opening Group A game at the 2019 Women's World Cup. The 1995 world champions began with a shot that was deflected off Onome Ebi into the net. Later in the same first half, Lisa Marie Utland fired through the hands of keeper Tochukwu Oluemi to make it 2-0. An own goal by Osinachi Ohale sealed Nigeria's fate to the first half. When the two met in 1996, Norway defeated the Super Falcons 8-0. 24 nations are taking part in the Women's World Cup, which splits across 6 groups of 4. Super Eagles coach General has dropped Kelechi Iheanacho and Semi Ajayi and named 20 debutants in his final 23-man squad for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations in Egypt later this month. The final list comprises of 3 goalkeepers, 7 defenders, 4 midfielders and 9 strikers. Captain Mikel Obi, Ahmed Musa and Kenneth Omeria are the only players from the 2013 AFCON winning squad in South Africa in the final squad. The 3-time African champions will play Teranga Lions of Senegal in their final friendly on Sunday in Ismailia. Nigeria battle Burundi, Madagascar and Guinea in AFCON Group B. That is the news this evening. Thank you for joining us. For details on this and all the stories, visit our social media platforms and join the conversation on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. I am Olajumoke Olatunji. Have a pleasant evening.